The great ship came from the dying stars, and nobody in the Galactic Coalition knew what to do about it. Ambassador Zia Kareth was older than anyone could imagine, and she came from a place called Vera Prime, where the sun had burned for 10 billion years and now grew cold and weak. Her people were ancient when most species in the galaxy still lived in caves and hunted with simple tools. They had seen empires rise and fall, had watched stars die and be born again. And now she had traveled across the black void of space to bring a message that could save everyone. But there was a problem that made the leaders of the coalition pace back and forth in worry and frustration. Nobody could understand a single thing she said. The coalition had the best technology in the known universe. They had machines that could translate 1,000 languages in seconds. They had scientists who had spent their whole lives studying how aliens communicated. They had artificial minds that could learn any pattern and make sense of any code. Yet when Kareth tried to speak, all of this amazing technology failed completely. Her language was unlike anything they had ever seen or heard. She did not use sounds alone like most species did. Instead, her body glowed with patterns of colored light that shifted and changed like waves on the shore. At the same time, she made vibrations so low that normal ears could not hear them, but sensitive machines could detect them humming through the floor and walls. And there was something else too, something that came from her skin like a gentle mist, carrying chemical signals that seemed to have meaning. The coalition's top xenolinguist was a being called Vorthan, who had successfully decoded 412 alien languages in his long career. He stood before the council chamber and admitted defeat with shame in his voice. "We have tried everything," Vorthan said to the gathered leaders. "Our computers find patterns in her light displays, but they do not match any known linguistic structure. The vibrations seem to carry information, but we cannot separate signal from noise. And the chemical emissions change so rapidly that we cannot catalog them fast enough to find meaning. It is as if she is speaking 3 languages at once, and all 3 must be understood together to make any sense." The Coalition Council included representatives from 50 different species, and they all watched the Old Diplomat through screens that showed her isolation chamber. She floated in a special atmosphere that kept her alive, her body wrapped in robes that shimmered like starlight. Her skin flickered with soft pulses of blue and gold, and even without understanding her words, anyone watching could feel her sadness and frustration. "How much time do we have?" asked High Chancellor Meridex, a tall being with silver skin and 4 arms that moved constantly when he was nervous. "Our medical scans show that she is dying," answered the chief physician. "Her species has never been studied, but we can see her body weakening. Perhaps 3 months, perhaps less. Whatever she came to tell us, she must tell us soon, or we will never know." The humans in the room stayed quiet, as they usually did. Humanity had only joined the Galactic Coalition 15 years ago, and they were still considered newcomers, almost children compared to species that had traveled between stars for hundreds of thousands of years. When the older species talked, humans listened and learned. That was the way of things, but one human, a young diplomat named Sarah Chun, could not stop watching the old alien on the screen. There was something in the way Kareth moved, something in the desperate flashing of her lights that made Sarah's heart hurt. She had seen that look before in the faces of refugees who arrived on Earth with stories to tell and no words to tell them. It was the face of someone who had come so far and now feared that the journey had been for nothing. "What do we know about why she came?" Sarah asked, and several aliens turned to look at her with expressions that seemed annoyed at the interruption. "Our long-range sensors detected an anomaly in the region she came from," said Vorthan. "Something is moving through that sector of space, something our instruments cannot fully understand. Stars are going dark, not dying, but simply going silent. We believe she came to warn us about this threat, but without translation, we are guessing at shadows." The meeting went on for hours. with experts offering theories and other experts explaining why those theories would not work. They talked about building new machines and recruiting more scientists. They discussed the possibility of using telepathic species to make contact. But the telepaths who tried said that Earth's mind was like a storm of colors and sounds that overwhelmed them as the council debated. Ambassador Jakareth floated alone in her chamber, her lights growing dimmer with each passing day. She had traveled further than any of her kind had ever traveled, crossing distances that took years even at the fastest speeds. She had left behind her dying world and her dying people to deliver a warning that could save trillions of lives. And now she sat in silence while the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy looked at her like she was a puzzle they could not solve. Nobody noticed the human maintenance worker who cleaned the floors outside her chamber every night. Nobody paid attention to the tired man with gray hair and sad eyes, who pushed his cart past the observation window and sometimes stopped to watch the alien diplomat with a strange expression on his face. He was invisible, just another worker doing a job that mattered to no one. But Marcus Webb was watching, and he was thinking, and somewhere in his broken heart, he was beginning to understand something that all the great scientists and translators had missed. The old alien was not just speaking. She was singing, painting, and breathing her words all at once. And Marcus had spent his whole life learning to listen in ways that other people had forgotten. Marcus Webb had not always pushed a cleaning cart through the hallways of the Coalition station. Once, he had been someone important, someone whose name appeared in academic journals and whose lectures filled great halls with eager students. 20 years ago, he had been Professor Marcus Webb of the Earth Linguistic Institute, a man who could speak 37 human languages and had dedicated his life to understanding how people communicated across barriers of culture and distance. He had studied the clicking songs of the Khoisan people, the whistled language of the Canary Islands, the complex hand movements of a dozen sign languages, and the ancient tonal speech of his own grandmother, who came from a tiny village in the mountains of Nepal. His grandmother had taught him something that stayed with him his entire life. That words were only one small part of talking to another person. The real message lived in the space between words, in the rise and fall of voices, in the movement of hands and the light in someone's eyes. Listen with your whole body, she had told him, and you will hear what people are really saying. But Marcus had made a terrible mistake that cost him everything he had built. He had discovered a planet with primitive people who had not yet developed technology, and the rules said that such species must be left alone until they advanced on their own. The Coalition and Earth both had strict laws about this, but Marcus had fallen in love with their language, a beautiful system of sounds and gestures that was dying as their elders passed away. He could not bear to watch it disappear, so he had secretly visited them to record their speech and save it before it was gone forever. When the authorities found out, they destroyed his career without mercy. They called him reckless and dangerous. They said he might have contaminated an entire civilization with his interference. The university fired him. His wife left him because she could not handle the shame, and his children grew distant and cold. Within 2 years, Marcus Webb went from being a respected professor to being a man who cleaned floors and emptied garbage for minimum wage. He told himself that he deserved this punishment, that he had been foolish to break the rules. But late at night, when the corridors of the station were empty and quiet, he sometimes wondered if saving a beautiful language had really been such a terrible crime. It was on one of those quiet nights that Marcus first truly noticed Ambassador Jakareth. He had seen her before, of course. Everyone on the station knew about the alien diplomat that nobody could understand. But on this night, something made him stop his cart and really look at her through the thick window of her isolation chamber. She was floating in the strange atmosphere that kept her alive. her body wrapped in robes that shifted colors like oil on water. Her skin was a deep purple that reminded Marcus of the twilight sky above his grandmother's village. And patterns of light moved across her surface in ways that seemed random at first, but Marcus did not see random patterns. His brain, trained by decades of linguistic study, saw something else entirely. He saw rhythm. He saw repetition. He saw the building blocks of meaning. The lights on her body moved in sequences that started small and grew larger, like waves building toward a shore. Some colors appeared together again and again, like words that belonged in the same sentence. And when she moved her thin arms, the gestures seemed to punctuate the light patterns, adding emphasis or changing their meaning. Marcus pressed his hand against the cold glass and watched for a long time. Then he noticed something that made his heart beat faster. When she produced certain light patterns, her body also vibrated in ways that he could feel through the floor beneath his feet. The vibrations were too low for his ears to hear, but his bones sensed them, and they seemed to match the rhythm of the lights perfectly. "My God," Marcus whispered to himself. "She is not speaking one language. She's speaking all of her languages at the same time." It was like nothing he had ever encountered, but it also reminded him of something deeply familiar. He thought of his grandmother singing old songs while her hands moved in traditional gestures. He thought of the deep-sea creatures on Earth who communicated with light in the dark ocean. He thought of elephants who could feel each other's calls through their feet. Across vast distances, Kareth was doing all of these things at once. And that was why the alien translators could not understand her. They were trying to decode one channel at a time, but her meaning only existed when all the channels came together. Marcus knew he should walk away and report his observation to someone more qualified. But he also knew that nobody would listen to a disgraced janitor. They would thank him for his input and ignore everything he said. So he did something that he knew was against every rule on the station. He began to answer her using the control panel on his cleaning cart. Marcus accessed the environmental systems in the corridor. He adjusted the lighting to create simple patterns on the wall outside her chamber, just basic sequences of bright and dark that mimicked the rhythm he saw in her displays. Then he pressed his palm against the wall and hummed a deep note that vibrated through the structure. Kareth stopped moving. Her light patterns froze for a moment, then burst into wild activity. She turned toward the window and looked directly at Marcus with eyes that had no pupils but somehow showed intense emotion. She responded with a cascade of lights and vibrations that were too complex for Marcus to understand. But he recognized something in them that needed no translation at all. Hope. She was showing him hope. Marcus smiled sadly and held up his hands to show that he could not keep up with her complicated speech. He made slow, simple patterns with his body, trying to show that he was just beginning to learn. To his amazement, Kareth slowed down. She simplified her patterns. She began to teach him for the next 3 hours. A forgotten janitor and an ancient diplomat talked through a window in the middle of the night, building a bridge between their worlds, one small gesture at a time. Neither of them knew that the station's security systems were recording everything they did. By morning, Marcus Webb would be in chains, and his whole life would change once again. The security officers came for Marcus at dawn, when he was sitting in his small room eating a simple breakfast of toast and coffee. They did not knock or ask permission. They simply opened his door and pointed weapons at him while their leader read a list of charges that made his head spin. Marcus Webb, the officer said in a cold voice, "You are under arrest for violation of Containment Protocol 7, unauthorized contact with a protected diplomatic subject, and potential contamination of first contact proceedings. Come with us now." Marcus did not resist. He had expected something like this from the moment he touched that control panel. He put down his coffee cup and held out his hands for restraints, and he walked calmly between the armed officers as they led him through. corridors where his co-workers stopped to stare and whisper. The holding cell was cold and empty, except for a metal bench and a small screen on the wall that showed nothing but gray static. Marcus sat down and waited, thinking about what he had done and wondering if it had been worth the trouble hours passed before anyone came to talk to him. When the door finally opened, 3 members of the Coalition Council entered, including High Chancellor Meridex and the Chief Xenolinguist Vorthan. The third was Sarah Chun, the young human diplomat who had spoken up during the meeting about Z.A. Kareth. "Do you understand the seriousness of your actions?" Meridex asked, his forearms crossed over his silver chest in a gesture that showed disapproval. "Yes, Chancellor," Marcus replied. "I understand that I broke the rules. But I also understand that I made progress where your experts made none." Vorthan made a sound that might have been a laugh or a growl. "Progress? You flickered some lights and made the floor vibrate. That is not communication. That is noise." "Then why did she respond to me?" Marcus asked simply. The 3 visitors looked at each other, and Marcus saw uncertainty in their expressions. They had watched the recordings. They had seen Z. Kareth's reaction. They could not explain it, and that bothered them deeply. Sarah Chun stepped forward and spoke in a gentle voice. "Mr. Webb, can you tell us what you were trying to do? Help us understand what you saw that we missed." Marcus took a deep breath and tried to organize his thoughts. "Our language is not a single system," he began. "It is multiple systems working together, like instruments in an orchestra. The light patterns carry certain types of meaning. The vibrations carry others, and there are probably chemical signals too that I could not detect. But the important thing is that none of these channels work alone. You cannot translate the lights without also understanding the vibrations. You cannot understand the vibrations without seeing the gestures. Everything connects to everything else." Vorthan shook his head. "We considered this possibility. Our computers analyzed all channels simultaneously. The results were still meaningless, because your computers think like computers," Marcus said. "They look for patterns in data, but they do not feel the patterns. They do not let the rhythm move through them. They do not understand that language is not just information. It is emotion, culture, history, and soul all wrapped together." Meridex unfolded his arms and studied Marcus with new interest. "You speak as if you have experience with such things. I have spent my whole life studying how humans communicate," Marcus said. "We have thousands of languages, and many of them are more than just sound. We have languages that use hands instead of voices. We have languages where the same sound means different things depending on how high or low you speak it. We have people who communicate through music, through dance, through pictures and symbols. And I learned from my grandmother that the best communicators use everything at once, body and voice and heart together." There was silence in the cell for a long moment. Then Meridex spoke again, and his voice was different now, less angry and more thoughtful. "The diplomat's health has improved since your contact," he admitted. "Our doctors cannot explain it. They say her vital signs were fading before, but now they are stronger. It is as if your communication gave her something she needed. It gave her hope," Marcus said. "She came across the galaxy to deliver a message, and for weeks, nobody could hear her. She was dying alone in a room full of people who looked at her like a broken machine. Then I showed her that someone was willing to try, really try, to understand. That matters more than any translation algorithm." Sarah Chun turned to the others. "We should give him a chance," she said. "What do we have to lose? Our methods have failed. The ambassador is dying, and there is something in the space outside Varan territory that frightens her so much that she traveled years to warn us about it. We need to know what it is. The Coalition will lose respect if we trust such an important task to a disgraced human," Vorthan argued. "He broke laws on Earth and he broke laws here. Why should we believe he can succeed where our best minds have failed?" Marcus looked directly at the xenolinguist. "I have nothing left to lose," he said quietly. "My career is gone. My family is gone. My reputation is destroyed. All I have now is the knowledge in my head and the desire to help. I am not asking for glory or reward. I am asking for the chance to do something good with the years I have left." Meredith stared at Marcus for a long time, his alien eyes showing a depth of thought that was hard to read. Finally, he made a decision. "We will give you one chance," the Chancellor said. "You will have access to proper equipment and scientific support. You will work with our translators under careful supervision. If you make genuine progress, we will discuss the charges against you. If you fail or cause harm, the punishment will be severe." Marcus nodded and stood up from the bench. His legs were shaking, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "Take me to her," he said. "We have already wasted too much time." As they led him out of the cell, Marcus felt something he had not felt in many years. He felt like his life might finally have meaning again. The work was slow and difficult, but Marcus threw himself into it with all the energy he had. The Coalition gave him a team of assistants, including Sarah Chun, who volunteered to help despite warnings that her career might suffer. They gave him equipment that could produce complex light patterns, subsonic vibrations, and even chemical signals that tried to match what ZH produced. But the real breakthrough came when Marcus stopped trying to act like a scientist and started acting like a student. He spent hours sitting in the chamber with Skureth, protected by a special suit that let him breathe her atmosphere. He did not try to analyze everything she did. Instead, he watched and listened and felt, letting the patterns wash over him until they started to make sense in a way that went beyond logic. He taught her simple human gestures, and she taught him simple Varan signals, and together they built a shared vocabulary, one small piece at a time. After 2 weeks, Marcus could understand basic concepts. After a month, he could have simple conversations. And the things Kareth told him made his blood run cold with fear. There was something coming. He reported to the Coalition Council, his face pale and tired from long days of work. "She calls it the Silence, and it is spreading through her region of space like a plague. It does not destroy planets or kill people directly. Instead, it disrupts all forms of organized electromagnetic communication." The council members looked at each other in confusion. "What does that mean?" asked Meredith. "Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that you could no longer speak," Marcus explained. "Your mouth moves, but no sound comes out. The radio produces only static. Computers cannot send messages to each other. Ships cannot communicate with stations. Everywhere you look, the tools that connect people together simply stop working. That is what the silence does." The room went very quiet as the alien leaders thought about what this would mean for their Highland civilizations. Everything they had built depended on communication. Without it, their great networks of trade and government and defense would fall apart. Species that had worked together for thousands of years would become strangers, trapped in separate bubbles of emptiness. How did the Varan survive? Sarah Chun asked. "That is the important part," Marcus said. "The Varans evolved with multiple ways of communicating at the same time. When the silence disrupted their electromagnetic signals, they could still talk through vibrations and chemical signals. They adapted. They survived. But most species in the galaxy are not like them. Most species developed one efficient way to communicate and stopped there. When the silence takes that one way, they will have nothing left." Borthon stepped forward, his earlier doubt replaced by genuine concern. "Can the silence be stopped?" "Chareth does not know," Marcus admitted. "Our people have studied it for centuries, but they do not understand where it comes from or how to destroy it. What they do know is how to live through it. They came to share that knowledge, to help other species learn to communicate in multiple ways before it is too late. Why did she come here? Meredith asked. Why not go to the central worlds of the Coalition where the most powerful species live? Marcus smiled a strange, sad smile. Because she did not trust them. The powerful species built empires based on single efficient systems. They would not want to hear that their way of doing things was dangerous. They would argue and debate and delay until the silence swallowed them all. Then why us? Sarah pressed. Why humans? Because she studied your broadcasts, Marcus said, and his voice carried a note of wonder. Before her journey, she spent years watching and listening to the signals that Earth has been sending into space. She saw something in humanity that she did not see in other species. She saw chaos and diversity and 100 different ways of talking to each other. He paused and looked around the room at the alien faces watching him. Most species evolved toward one perfect language. He continued. Over time, they eliminate the inefficient alternatives. But humans never did this. We kept our thousands of languages, our sign systems, our musical traditions, our art and dance and written symbols. We communicate in ways that seem primitive and wasteful to other species. But Jira saw it differently. She saw a species that had never forgotten how to be flexible. Marcus pulled up images on the display screen, showing examples of human communication that the alien scientists had never studied. He showed them Aboriginal elders using songlines to navigate vast deserts. He showed them deaf communities having conversations entirely through hand movements and facial expressions. He showed them musicians from different cultures playing together without sharing any common spoken language. Humans are messy, Marcus said. We have never agreed on one right way to do anything. And that is exactly why Kareth chose us. We can learn her method because our brains are used to holding multiple systems at once. We can teach other species because we have already spent our whole history bridging gaps between different ways of thinking. Sarah Chun was crying softly, and Marcus could see that even the alien leaders were moved by what they were hearing. She did not come to the Coalition. Marcus finished. She came to Earth. She came to the species that the galaxy looks down on as young and foolish. She came because she believed that our weakness was actually our greatest strength. Meredith stood up from his chair and walked slowly toward Marcus. For a long moment, the two of them just looked at each other. Two beings from different worlds, trying to understand each other across a vast distance. Tell me what we need to do. The Chancellor said. Marcus took a deep breath. We need to create a new program, a way of training teams from every species to communicate in multiple modes. Light, sound, touch, chemistry, gesture. We need to teach the galaxy that efficiency is not everything. That sometimes the messy, complicated way is the only way that survives. He looked toward the window where Jareth was waiting in her chamber. Her lights glowing bright with hope, and we need to start now, he said, because the silence is already closer than anyone wants to believe. 5 years passed, and the galaxy changed in ways that nobody could have predicted. The Polyglot Initiative, as Marcus and Jareth called their program, grew from a small project into one of the most important institutions in Coalition history. Training centers opened on 100 worlds, teaching beings of every species how to communicate through light and sound and touch and chemical signals. What had once seemed impossible became merely difficult, and what had seemed difficult became routine. Humans led the way, just as Kareth had predicted. Their flexible minds adapted quickly to the new methods, and they proved to be excellent teachers who could show other species how to break free from their single-channel thinking. Young humans who had once been overlooked by the galactic community became valued instructors, helping proud ancient civilizations learn lessons that humanity had known for thousands of years. Marcus Webb became something he never expected to be, a hero. The coalition dropped all charges against him and offered him titles and honors that would have made his former self weep with joy. But the man who accepted these awards was different from the professor who had lost everything years ago. He was humbler now, and he understood that true success was not about personal glory. He chose to keep working from a small office on the training station, teaching classes during the day and spending his evenings with Jareth, who had become his closest friend. Her health had improved greatly since those dark days when nobody could understand her. And though she was still ancient and tired, she found new purpose in watching her vision come to life. "You were right about us," Marcus told her one night as they sat together watching the stars through a large window. "Humans are exactly what you thought we were," Jareth answered in her complex language that Marcus now understood as easily as his native tongue. "I was hopeful, not certain," she admitted. "When I left my dying world, I knew the odds were against me. But I had studied your species from afar, and I saw something in you that gave me courage. You are the children of a chaotic planet, born from struggle and survival. You carry within you the memory of all the different ways your ancestors learned to reach across the day, darkness, and find each other. We also carry cruelty and greed and foolishness." Marcus said sadly, "All species do," Jareth replied. "What matters is what you choose to do with your nature." And in this moment of great danger, humanity chose to help. The danger she spoke of was very real and growing closer every day. Reports from the edge of Coalition space told of the silence advancing, swallowing star systems in its strange embrace. Ships that entered the affected zones could not communicate with the outside world. Their crews emerged telling stories of terrible isolation, of weeks spent unable to speak to each other through their normal channels. But the trained teams were ready when the silence finally touched Coalition territory. It found a galaxy that was no longer helpless. The polyglot squads moved into action, setting up backup communication networks using every method they had learned. Light signals flashed between ships that could no longer use radio. Vibration codes passed through the hulls of space stations. Chemical messages floated in sealed containers between isolated communities. It was not perfect. The transition was hard and many struggled. But civilization did not collapse. The great networks of trade and government adapted and survived. And at the center of every successful response, there were humans showing others how to keep talking when the old ways failed. Marcus watched all of this from his small office. And sometimes he cried from the simple joy of knowing that his life had meant something. The scandal that had destroyed his career felt like ancient history now. His ex-wife had even sent him a message saying she was proud of him. And his children had reconnected with him after years of silence. But the moment he treasured most came on a quiet day when Sarah Chun, now a senior diplomat, visited him with a young Varan who had been born on the Coalition station. "This is Vareth," Sarah said, using the name carefully. "She wanted to meet you." The young Varan was small and bright, her light patterns quick and playful in the way of children everywhere. She looked at Marcus with curious eyes and spoke in the combined language of her people. "You are the one who listened," she said. "You are the one who heard my grandmother when everyone else had given up." Marcus knelt down so he could look at her directly. "Your grandmother saved us all," he said. "I just helped translate. She tells me stories about you," Jareth continued. "She says you are proof that the universe is kind sometimes. That when everything seems lost, someone will reach across the emptiness and take your hand." Marcus felt tears running down his face, and he did not try to hide them. "Do you know what language your grandmother first taught me?" he asked. The young Varan shook her head. "Hope," Marcus said. "Before I learned a single word of Varan, she taught me hope. And that is the most important language of all years later." When historians wrote about how the galaxy survived the silence, they focused on the technology and the training programs and the political decisions that made everything possible. They mentioned Marcus Webb as an important figure, the human janitor who broke through where experts had failed. They praised the coalition for its wisdom in listening to an unlikely hero, but Marcus never cared about his place in history. When he thought about his legacy, he thought about the young Varan girl and her generation, growing up in a galaxy where different species could truly understand each other. He thought about the barriers that had fallen and the connections that had formed. He thought about his grandmother in her mountain village, teaching a young boy to listen with his whole body. This is what humans do, Marcus said in his final lecture before he retired. We reach across distances. We find ways to connect. We refuse to accept that any gap is too wide or any language too strange. When the universe said that we could not understand the old alien diplomat, we answered with the most human response possible. We tried anyway. He paused and looked at his students. Beings from dozens of different worlds who sat together in the same room, speaking a language that combined light and sound and chemistry and gesture. That is humanity's gift, he said. Not our technology or our ships or our weapons. Our gift is the stubborn belief that everyone deserves to be heard, and that with enough patience and love, any two souls can find a way to speak to each other. The students applauded in their many different ways, and Marcus smiled somewhere far away. Jareth felt the vibrations of their joy through the structure of the station, and her ancient heart was full.